Hey, thanks everyone for joining us on this beautiful sunny April day. We're going to talk about a timely topic right now, high tunnel enterprise budgets and what we can learn from them. Vern Grubinger from UVM Extension has been working hard to put these together and is going to pilot a new tool with everybody today that's on the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers website. And then Georgia McDougall from the Intervale Community Farm has been generous enough to try out this tool over the course of its development and is going to share some of her experiences using it. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Vern. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Becky, and thank you so much for stewarding these wonderful webinars, arranging things, facilitating. Much appreciated. And I'm gonna launch right into the slides here. Going to talk about enterprise uh, budgeting and benchmarking, and with a focus on high tunnels, although the principles really apply to any crop. So this work's been done in collaboration with VVBGA, and also thanks to the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative, we have some funding from the Vermont Agency of Agriculture to support this. So enterprise budgets are about assessing profitability. No surprise there. You need to know what all your expenses are and all your revenues typically for a given crop. Benchmarking is comparing data. This can either be on your farm, one tunnel against another, one crop against another to help make an internal decision, or it gets exciting when you can start to compare across farms. So people doing the same thing as much as possible, i.e., high tunnel, trellis, slicing tomatoes. Where do you stand in the community of your peers? And guesstimating is where we don't want to go, which is making decisions based on intuition, assumption, works okay, but not as good as a data-based decision. So a couple years ago, we did performance benchmarking, really looking at the yields that folks were getting in trellised, sliced tunnel slicers, tunnel tomato slicers grown in the ground with irrigation. And we had 47 farms complete the survey. We did kind of a deep dive, but here it just shows you the range that we got of gross revenue per square foot. So the tunnels are different sizes, so we standardize everything to square foot. And you can see it ranges from there's a tenfold range, $3 to $30 a square foot gross revenue. And the highest was a farm selling tomatoes at $5.99 a pound and getting 5.35 pounds per square foot. And you can see the lowest revenue is $3 a pound, under a pound per square foot. But what doesn't this tell you? Pop quiz. Is anybody making money? Right? Because if it costs you $6 a pound to sell a tomato at $5.99 a pound, it doesn't matter how many pounds you make. And similarly, what if it costs you $1.50 to grow 1 pound of tomato per square foot? You're making $1.50 a pound. So this is kind of the next step in this process. We were trying to help people increase their yields by understanding what was going on with ventilation, fertilization, irrigation, and all that. But the next step is, are people making profit? And if so, what's the range there? So there's a bunch of benchmarks. You can look at obviously your net revenue per square foot. It could be your net revenue per pound. It could be net revenue per labor hour, and this goes on and on. There's a lot of ways to kind of, look into the house of profitability through the different windows. And in these performance benchmarks, allude to profitability and they're related to it, but not necessarily as directly. So we always want to know what the yields are on some area basis. And now we're getting into the labor and relating it to yield and profitability. What are the variable costs? What are the fixed costs? Are they per square foot, by pound? So this is where I get excited of what are all the different ways we can look at this and what will work for you. Each farm's going to find out which indicators they want to use. So when this all started, I looked around for enterprise budgets, and there are a few of them out there that are pretty good. There's some really simple ones that I guess is a place to start. But if you have one line for what's your labor in a tunnel, it's not really actionable, right? You're like, oh, I want to reduce my labor, but you don't see where it is. But like in this budget on the left under labor, you can start to see they break it down, tilling and laying the beds, planting the plants, staking, pruning, weeding. So it's getting more granular and you can get a better understanding of your costs. But it really still isn't detailed enough to truly get to all the costs. So simple example, the first line under operating, soil test, 1 unit, $15. Well, that's not really what a soil test costs. You've got to pay somebody to take the sample. You got to take it to the post office. You got to pay the postage. It's, probably 3 times that. So it's a tiny piece, but these things add up. If you're trying to get to your actual costs, you really need to track everything. And the good news is you don't need to do it over and over, right? You build this budget. Initially, you fill in gaps by collecting data, and then after a while, you know what certain things cost. You don't need to keep tracking them. So this one's the University of Missouri, and these slides will be posted so you can get the links. The ones I'm sharing have spreadsheets you can download and fill yourself. So that's really nice that they give you their numbers, and especially this one's kind of old, so they're obsolete. But you can design this for your own markets, and you can add lines like there's wholesale and retail. If you wanted to put seconds in there, you could do that for revenues too. Here's another one that is detailed in a different way from Washington State. It's fairly old, but again, you can download it and fill it yourself. And it's just interesting to me when you look at these budgets where they've decided to get granular and where they haven't. They're not consistent in what they pick. This one, I don't even think has soil tests on it, for example. So, but those aren't, the big-ish items, the soil tests and your drip lines. It's definitely, you all know, right? It's going to be in the labor, primarily of pruning, trellising, harvesting, and that's where the record keeping is really going to matter. But again, to get to true costs, you need to enter all of these items. So that's why we built this tool. And it started with just a spreadsheet. And Georgia was one of the farmers. We had 8 farmers do this for slicing tomatoes last year and refined the spreadsheet before we put it into this online tool. So this is the draft landing page at the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers website, vvbga.org. If you're not a member, join up. You have to be a member to use this tool because it's going to store your data and your budgets in your farm folder. The good news is you can join for zero if you can't afford the $75 a year fee. So you can still use this tool, but there's no way to use it from the outside because of the web requirements to store information. So you'll either be starting a new budget or looking at ones you already made. And you can also copy those budgets to build new budgets, which is really nice. So you're not re-entering if it's the same, soil testing. Like you start with a template and work from there. And there's just some description here of how this all works. And here's some pieces of it that I'm going to show you. It's pretty detailed, so I won't show you all of it, but this is where you start, is you enter information about the crop and the tunnel, variable costs, fixed costs, and yield and revenue. So there's a budget and then there's a report. And that's kind of a nice feature of this. You're entering these things. You can stop at any time and see the summary. What have I entered so far? What does it look like? That's the report. And then you can go back and re-edit it and generate a new report. So it's not done till you're ready for it to be done. And it saves when you push that button, or if you just hit enter when you enter data, it's going to save automatically. So it's pretty hard to lose data. So let's start with the first section, which is your crop. You're selecting a value, which is the crop. And so when you click on that, you see on the right, we've populated it with common crops in the tunnel, but you could select other. For your purposes, this probably doesn't really matter. Like internally on the farm, you're going to name this tunnel, which will be the name of your budget. But why that's important is later when we get to this multi-farm benchmarking, we don't want to be comparing slicing tomatoes to spinach or even slicing tomatoes to cherry tomatoes if we can help it. So behind the scenes, once we have, pick a number, 15, 20 farms that did slicers or did spinach, then we can start to show, hey, anonymously, here's the numbers that farms have put in. You can see where the ranges are. So selecting that crop is the first step to building that out. And then there's some optional things like the name of your varieties, your tunnel name, and then there's a bunch of mandatory things like you need to put in your tunnel dimensions because to get to anything on a square foot basis, you're gonna have to mute somebody, please.
So let's see.
So you enter your tunnel dimensions, you get square footage. That's critical, obviously, to getting the yields and costs down per square foot. And if you're only half your tunnel or a third or a sixth, whatever is in the crop you're using, you can use that percentage box, which will then prorate the numbers later. You enter the date that you planted or direct seeded if it was, a winter crop and your last date, and that's going to automatically calculate the days in production. And so then we also able to get costs per days on things. So this is pretty nifty. Then we get to the really big section, which is variable costs. And this is all a work in progress. So we're going to be testing with other farmers and welcome more feedback. But one bit of feedback we just added was to help people approach labor costs the same way is to include your payroll tax and workman's comp right in that number you use, rather than making a separate box later. Again, just to have apples to apples as much as possible, because there's a lot of boxes for labor in here as you go. So this is just the very beginning of it. There's probably 100 lines in this. If you don't have very good records, you're going to be kind of shocked when you first go in here, and you can just guess as you go to start, but you're going to see where you probably want to go back and build some numbers. So there's soil testing, just for example. There's a sample, there's a cost per sample for the lab fees plus the postage. Then there's labor, some number of hours to take that sample and get it mailed. Compost, there's a number of yards at a cost per yard. Fertilizers, we just picked a total cost because it would get crazy if we started listing all the fertilizers and their individual costs in this spreadsheet. So you do that somewhere else. You put your total cost in. And then there's labor for spreading these materials, compost the fertilizer. And it goes on, setting up the irrigation, your transplant production, or transplant care. This is a lengthy section, but when you do it all, you'll have a really good handle on all your variable costs. Then in the fixed cost section, which is optional if you don't want to consider your fixed costs for assessing your profitability, you don't have to. And by the way, everything you don't enter just has a 0 there and will show up in red in your report just to kind of give you a heads up, like, hey, you didn't put a number in this box. Did you intend to leave it at 0? But we've built some things here to make it easy. So you put your total cost of building that tunnel, and it's going to divide it by 20 for the lifespan of the tunnel assumed to be that long. Same with your site preparation. Irrigation assumes a 10-year lifespan, heating 10 years. So it's just a way to kind of simplify you doing lots of calculations. And then it goes on with property costs, and permits and other things that are fixed costs. And then we get to kind of the meat of the matter. How much did you sell? How much did you grow? And so right now we are into these 3 categories: your retail, wholesale, or seconds. You enter a number of pounds, a price, and you get revenues. It'll add it up to your total revenue. And same thing with yields. And I see Georgia nodding. Many of these suggestions came from her and other farmers that tested it. So super appreciative of that. And again, this is your budget. This stuff's going to show up on your report too. But really important to have decent numbers here because all the benchmarks are going to be based on these things. And here's what the benchmark part looks on your report. So the top of the report just shows all the things you entered. These are your different costs, variable, fixed, etc. But here now they're starting to be manipulated. And this was just a made up budget where I put numbers in, but you can see the variable cost per square foot, $3.04. And what's the fixed cost? Your revenue. And cool thing is you can see your total hours, your total wages, and you start to get into, how many hours per 1,000 square feet? What's your gross per hour of labor? What's your net per hour of labor? Maybe only with variable costs. I like this one. How many minutes per pound of marketable yield are you paying for labor? And then you can get it by days of growth too. So lots of things to think about. Again, you will decide what's useful to you, but you'll have all these data points, and then what do you compare it to? So again, once we have enough farms, we'll have either a column where you compare, here's the average, or we're talking about making graphs where you'll see the ranges. But I'm pretty excited about having a way to know kind of what's typical. What do you want to be average? Do you want to be above average? Are you okay being below average? And some of this speaks to the system, right? If you're a diversified CSA farm growing 100 things and tomatoes aren't that important to your clients, you're not striving for the highest yields and returns. But if the crop you're growing, whatever it is, tomatoes, spinach, peppers, is really important to your enterprise and takes up a lot of real estate in your tunnels, you probably want to be aiming for at least average, maybe above. And this is what the farm to farm benchmarking will look like in some form down the road. This was from the spreadsheets we did earlier, but you can see the wide range of areas from 2,000 feet to 7,400 square feet. Look at those marketable yields ranging from 1.4 up to 5 pounds per square foot. The prices um, averaging 426, which is very similar to our big survey, which was 456, the 47 farms. You can see wages in here. So the interesting thing that I highlighted that's on the right there is the net revenue is ranging from a buck and a half to $15.67. That is a pretty big difference. And again, you go back and look why that is. High yields, high prices. Who knows? Maybe operator error. I won't I won't completely stand by the numbers people entered here, but that's a pretty big difference. And some other things that we collected. You can see the wide range of differences that we're getting there. Yeah, minutes per labor minutes per pound harvested ranged from less than 1 minute to over 5 minutes. That to me is really interesting. If like, and this is where it's going to get interesting with qualitative exploration to go like, what are the systems that the farm that seems to be so fast are using versus the farm that seems slow? Is it the quality of the labor? Is it some harvest, trays and mechanisms? So I think I'm excited to move beyond just the numbers and try and get some understanding. So when we're ready to release this, which is coming up on us, we invite folks to join. First, we'll be doing some testing with our, our people that volunteer to kind of be beta testers and put numbers in and give more feedback and make sure the system doesn't have glitches. But to do this, you need to be set up to collect some data. If you don't have labor and yield data, it's going to be pretty squirrely what you get out. Um, and again, you can start with estimates. We're going to have some tools to help people collect those things. Um, so then you join, you create your budgets, and at the end, when you have a final budget, you can opt in. There's a little box you'll check that said, I agree to share this data for the benchmarking. It's going to be completely anonymous. It just means we're collecting, again, all cherry tomatoes or all spinach data in a spreadsheet and making graphs. But you can opt out and say you don't want your data in there. That's fine. And then you can get informed about where you stand among your peers and where you think some management adjustments could be made. So I showed a picture up there of Krista in her tunnel. Note the clipboard in hand. So we're working on some tools. Becky started this and I tweaked it a little. Just so one simple thing, you don't have to weigh everything, right? But you could have a log where you're measuring everything coming out of one row or everything coming out of 20 plants. But is it the number of boxes and you know the weight? Are you actually weighing that? And then you have some records to go back who entered that data, what was the area, and so you can get a solid estimate of yield. It doesn't need to be totally precise. So that's the big overview of where we're headed with these. And yeah, so maybe we'll let Georgia go and then open it up for questions when you can see how a farmer has been using it so far.
Hi, everyone. My name is Georgia McDougall. I manage the high tunnels at Intervale Community Farm in Burlington. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about using this tool that we've been developing with Vern for tomatoes, but also for some other things on the farm. Um, So we have 6 unheated Arnois high tunnels at ICF, and for the past 10 years, we have had 4. This past July, we had another 2 built, so this is kind of an important factor in looking at some of our data. So this coming year, we will have 5 in production for the summer. We're going to have 1 in tomatoes, 1 in cucumbers, and 2-ish in sweet horn peppers. And then this past winter, we had 5 in production. And next year, we're going to have 6 in production. And those are mostly in direct seeded spinach, salanova lettuce, parsley, cilantro, and some big kale, and then also just a little bit of fun spring stuff, some radishes, bok choy, arugula, baby kale. And the majority of our high tunnel crops are going to our CSAs. So we have a 330 person or share winter CSA that's going from October through May. And we have distribution for that 1 time a week. So we're really harvesting throughout the entire winter. And then we have a few weeks off in between our winter and summer share. And then we're moving on to that twice weekly distribution with about double the shares. So initially this tool was shared with us as a way to look at tomatoes. And for me, as someone who's kind of newer to looking at like financial management and labor management on a farm, it was really helpful for me to look and see like what's costing us a lot of money, get a better understanding of fixed and variable costs. But talking with Andy, I would say that, for ICF, this tomato tool was pretty like affirming in that our current practices are profitable. We're probably not going to change anything too drastic from looking at those notes. There was a pretty similar analysis that we looked at and did some really detailed labor and yield tracking before I was here in 2018 and 2019. But I think it's great to have this tool in case we want to change some of our growing practices or do a variety trial. Of course, there's always room for us to improve. But I think the more interesting part that I want to talk about is I really enjoyed filling out the original form of the tool, which was a spreadsheet that Vern shared with us, and we worked on refining that for tomato production. But I had some time when I didn't feel like going outside in December, January, and I wanted to just do a little bit of a deeper dive into dissecting which of our tunnel crops were profitable, and looking at the different labor that we were putting and resources we were putting into the production. So I kind of translated that initial spreadsheet and just changed around some of the things so it would be a little bit more relevant to winter growing, so that we could compare profitability of those winter greens. And of course, this is good to do at any point. We've done different kind of like less thorough profitability analysis type work with winter greens before, but the sheet that Vern had made just was like way more thorough and had other things that were really helpful to look at it like more of a holistic view. And I think that also just timing wise, historically we've been growing in 4 tunnels in the winter. This year we added a 5th, mostly in big kale, and next year we're going to be growing in all 6. So kind of just like a good timely thing to be looking into that to decide like what do we really want to fill our tunnels with, and do we want to change any of the percentages or like growing methods that we are using. So we did definitely learn some things, and this is a breakdown just of the main things we're growing in the tunnel and like a per bed profit return on each of those things. So I'll just go through some of the things that we learned. So at the bottom of the list, we had paper pot spinach, and We only do one planting of the paper pot spinach, and it's kind of evolved to be that way to fill in this like early winter gap that we have. But paper pot, we don't do anything else in paper pot, so I'd say we're like pretty bad at doing it, or at least I'm very bad at using the paper pot transplanter. So we often have issues just with like getting good establishment. And just looking at our data from that, you know, we had a lot more labor costs from the seeding and the transplanting, but also we were getting about 30 or 40% of the yields to the direct seeded. So it's like, okay, clearly we want to, prioritize that in my planning for next winter of like, how do we get rid of that? How do we fill in that gap of spinach that we might have, but get rid of paper pot spinach? Yeah, again, so just focusing on the direct seeded spinach. Like our members really love the direct seeded spinach and it's making us money. So how are we going to just like have maybe a higher ratio of that, but also focus on like having it available all winter? So that means like changing around planting schemes. And then also, I think we already knew this, but it was good just kind of like validation that we really need to be mechanically harvesting because we were seeing that most of our labor costs was coming from harvest of that spinach. And of course, it's not like super possible for us. We have unheated tunnels, so we are forced to harvest by hand when it's really cold and the morphology of the plant is just really low to the ground. But in the spring, even if we want to, I think sometimes we get in the mentality that we like want to get every piece of spinach because it's so beautiful and we want to give it all to our members. Like it's better to even just do a first cut with our green saws. And then kind of just going back again to the fact that like all of our winter greens, we do a little bit of wholesaling, but pretty much they're all going to our CSA. And looking at the fact that we're pretty much breaking even on our big kale. And so it's kind of good to like for us to still, I think, focus a lot of our resources on trying to find a good amount of kale for us to grow and also maybe work on making it more profitable, which I think that we have a lot of room to improve just like in our general management of that kale. And being a CSA, we're definitely going to keep growing kale. It serves a really nice place on the tables for our CSA members of being like more of a cooking green. We're happy to grow it, but also like we're not going to probably ever grow more than 5 beds of it. Maybe we'll grow less of it, and we're going to put more resources into like honing in that production. And then, yeah, just like our top 3 crops, this is mostly what we're already using our winter growing space for. But again, I think trying to maximize the herb growing space. Of course, people don't want as much herbs as they want of spinach and lettuce, and it's a little bit more finicky in the winter than those things. But definitely just trying to keep the majority of our tunnels in those crops with some other fun things sprinkled in. Yeah, so again, they are favorites of our CSA members. They're making us money. I think like for me personally, I just want to keep working on being really consistent with our harvesting of those to like have a pretty consistent number of like a weight number for each of those items throughout the winter. Some beautiful tunnel photos. Okay, and then kind of doing a little looking into the future, but also talking about just using this tool for things other than tomatoes. I think that another way that we're looking to track some data is we've recently moved our sweet-horn pepper production from hoop houses to high tunnels, and just like we've got some different soil types and we're not able to use some of the practices we were using in the hoop houses in these high tunnels. So last year we had kind of a growing year, and this year we're growing in 2 different tunnels. and we're going to try some different things in each of those tunnels. So I'm hoping to use some clipboards to track labor and yields coming from those two different houses, to compare different factors that we're doing in each of them. And I think that using that budgeting tool will be useful for that as well. So I think that, the takeaways are clear, but also really important. Just that, like, it's great to spend as much time as we can to actually really like focus on the crops that are making us money, and not just like kind of do a vibe analysis of like this seems pretty good, but do a little bit of a deeper dive into that. And I think just as a CSA, like we do want to grow things that make money, but also we want to grow things that are retaining our CSA member. And for us, that is really what winter greens are. And then I think again, yeah, just isolating which factors are really costing the farm most money. Maybe we can change those factors. Maybe we can just be more mindful of them. But I think for us at ICF, using this tool through its evolution for not only tomatoes, but crop versus crop or different variety trials is a really great function of it. And we're really grateful to Vern and the rest of the team for getting that developed for us.
Thanks, Georgia.
Yeah.
Let's open it up. Vern, do you want to take questions or have anything else to say?
Sure, let's open it up. I did want to give a shout out to Georgia because it was all tomato focused. And then when she told me, oh, I use this tool for my winter greens, that was kind of the insight to, oh yeah, it could actually be used across crops. I mean, there's a little bit of tension that when you start to get into different production systems, there's a bunch of stuff, trellising doesn't make sense. You just have to ignore it if you're doing winter greens. And the same thing, we added direct seeding to transplanting. So days in the tunnel, with tomatoes, we were trying to be clear. We're not counting the growing the transplant part. It was as the tunnel real estate time. But I think we're getting to where it can be useful across crops. Where it isn't so useful, I think, is the highly diversified tunnel on smaller scale farms, perhaps that are growing, 30 things. Like I'm feeling like we need to build a separate budget for that because starting to track all the individual crops is probably not a good use of time. And it also begs the question, field crops, like which tool, what are there crops where this would make sense? Because I'm hoping it is easier than having a separate spreadsheet where you have to build all those formulas to create the benchmarks, right? It's built in how many minutes per pound, how many dollars per square foot. And what I also like is for planning, when they aren't real numbers, you can be using estimates and just comparing, well, it looks like this is a path forward for making money or something else. Wow, that doesn't look as promising. So you can just mess with it too. Obviously, we don't want you submit this for the farm to farm benchmarking if it's all made up. We want those to be real numbers. I guess I'd ask growers out there, have people been building enterprise budgets for their major crops? And if so, finding them useful?
Hi, Vern. This is Bill Chidsey.
Hey, Bill.
So back in 16, Becky helped me build a budget for the oat straw crop, and it was a wonderful experience. I've used it and learned from it. And now that I've got a new place, I can't wait to make some money with it.
Great.
But that was a one-on-one workshop that was offered by UVM in 2016, I believe.
As I mentioned, we're still refining this. So we'll have some beta testers. I mean, I'm grappling with whether to open up this season. It's sort of a busy time of year, and if people don't have the record keeping tools in place, I'm not sure how much traction there'll be, but once we have it working pretty well, I think we will open it up widely and just urge people maybe to focus more on the record keeping this season so that is more useful in the next winter. And also we're, as I mentioned, really eager to collect a range of record keeping tools. I mean, I've seen all kinds of labor tracking things out there where people have their, employees report, or I like some of the stuff Krista Alexander talks about. You build your knowledge base a piece at a time. I mean, track something in detail, a row of pruning and trellising for tomatoes, and now you know. So next year you just put those numbers in, but you do a deeper dive on maybe, harvesting and sorting. So you don't have to do it all at once. I think that's an important concept. Otherwise, it's could be overwhelming. And then there's some phone apps. I know, Becky, you were having workers just, I don't know if it was an app, but just report time to you, um, phone to phone.
Yeah, they were just like using a text message, and then I would track it that way. Like every time they harvested, I'd say, send me how many trays you harvested. And I think it's I think one of the tricky things is figuring out the ways that work both for you and your crew. But I think the point is it doesn't matter how you get there. It's just getting there and having a system that's easy for everybody. So um I'm sure there's a much better way than text messages, but that was kind of what worked for us. And they remembered every time they harvested, I'd get the number of trays they pulled, and it's really helpful.
And Krista gave a talk at the annual meeting, I think last year, about tracking for profitability. And one thing stuck in my mind in particular that she said is she trains her workers to understand that this is part of their job. It's not an add-on that does the record keeping. Um, they get trained in it and they are expected to do it. And I think that's something I hadn't really thought about. If you're being asked to do this on top of your work, that's one way to think of it. But that's different than, yeah, this comes with the job.
I also think like high tunnels are a good place to start for people who haven't done this much. I think for two reasons. One, it's like kind of a contained space and you can like tabulate things a little more easily, but also it's I think like less scary to start with a crop that does make money, and so you can feel pretty confident like, okay, that's a profit center. So let's start with that and not open like a huge can of worms and then applying that to other crops. It's really cool to see like how Georgia and ICF have been using it for greens, and then to be able to make decisions from there, I think is really empowering.
Yeah, and I'm again excited about the larger farm community data. I'm thinking back to some listserv discussions that have happened among growers recently, like, um, do you graft or do you use 1 liter or 2 liter? And a lot of the responses is, oh, we do such and such. We keep it to single liter to keep it simple and reduce labor. But yeah, how does that relate to yield? Is it saving money or not? And I think a tool like this, if enough growers of both types use it, we'd be able to compare with real numbers. Well, I've learned a lot about, we have a great web designer, Tamarack Media. But yeah, some challenges of the web architecture behind this. Like one decision we had to make is, do you auto-populate labor with one rate through the whole thing? It's less tedious entering that number, but then you can't differentiate management tasks to non-management tasks. Or when we did the first spreadsheet, some farms had 3 labor rates depending on which employees were working. So we decided to leave it that you enter it. So you will have to go through and keep putting in 20, 20, 20, 25, 50, whatever it is. It's not that onerous, but it would have been nice to have a system where you could enter one number and then override it, but that's actually complicated web architecture. Well, anybody out there eager to be a tester? Can't wait to get in there and put your data in and tell me what could be improved. If so, you can send me an email on the side too. And the other thing I guess I'd ask the group is, where should we start? Obviously, I think tomatoes, but should we go for like slicers, cherries, and high looms and try and get three groups of farmers entering those? Winter crops, is it spinach and lettuce? I don't think we can say, hey, here's 10 crops. Please fill out as many as you can, because I'd like to get to that critical mass so we can start to build the multi-farm benchmarking. Like, what's that going to look like to you, the user, at the end? Is it just columns? Is it graphs? Is it to get a percent of how you're above or below the average? There's a lot of options for what that benchmark report can look like.
I'd be curious about cucumbers.
All right. Well, not a very talkative group here we have today. What about Alyssa? Do you see many enterprise budgets out there when you're working with vegetable farms?
I think this tool is great. I'm really glad you're doing it. I think the key, as you said, is record keeping, um, where the labor isn't usually tracked at granular level. And there's there's a lot of different ways to do it. But the important part is that it's done, that records are kept, and you can do the analysis, at the end of the season. You don't have to do it while you're really busy as long as the records are being kept. So I think that's kind of key if people are interested in this is, paying attention to all what the inputs are going to be, but come up with a system. I know that there's clipboards are a great way to do it, but there's also a bunch of apps I've heard people use. One of the things I was interested in was looking at all the different record keeping apps. I've heard of Airtable, Tend, CogPro, Beat Clock, Clockify. Like there's all these different ways to do it. Um, but I think as long as you're doing it, that's important. The other thing that I think is super important for these enterprise analysis to be accurate if you're trying to set prices is to make sure in the final analysis that fixed overhead costs like insurance, interest, office expenses, taxes, those overhead fees get allocated to the crop if you're using it to set price. Because if you leave that overhead off, um, you don't get the right price. And it's really tempting to because it's not directly affecting your day-to-day decisions with the crop. So I would make sure that got allocated well.
And where that's interesting is farm to farm comparison, because farms have different fixed costs, and that's not typically manageable in the way variable costs are. That's why that first spreadsheet we crafted like two columns. One was, net returns per 1,000 square feet per hour of labor based on variable only and based on total. So you could just see, especially if you were in a unique situation where, yeah, you either had very high or low fixed costs relative to the community.
I think
But
you can
that is
do
something else
that
we'll see.
analysis without it, but you have
But
to,
that's different than the price setting. That's
yeah,
a
when you're
different point
setting
where,
the price, that's when you have to,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, great. I think we've reached the conclusion of what people have to say. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Georgia and others, for contributing to the process of this. And stay tuned for the rollout information when you're ready to enter all your excellent records.
Thanks, Vern. Thank you, Georgia. This is great. I would just say it's a great tool to try. And like as with my farm hat on, we haven't done a lot of great record keeping or enterprise analysis, and this is a really awesome place to start, even if you haven't done it before. So it's quick and really helpful, and it just opens conversations too on the farm that I have found helpful. So thank you both. Next week we're talking about kind of money again, but from a different angle. We're trying to talk about navigating economic uncertainties. So it's a facilitated informal conversation. We'll have a bunch of folks. Elisa, who just spoke, is from the Farm Viability Program, and I believe you're joining, and a couple other folks who work with farmers will be here to help navigate the conversation. So hopefully people can come without like full mouths of food to do some more talking. And that's next week. And then we just have 2 more after that. So thank you both and see you soon.